Almost everything you've been told about how to handle disrespect is wrong, not slightly off, not missing a nuance, wrong. And the worst part, the thing you're doing right now, automatically when someone dismisses you, that specific thing is making it worse. Here's what you've heard. Stay calm, rise above it, don't let them see it bother you, don't give them the satisfaction. That advice sounds right. It sounds like the kind of thing a composed, functional person does. It's not. It's the one strategy that's been studied and found to increase your internal stress load while changing absolutely nothing about the situation. But we'll get to that. First, here's something that should bother you more than the person who disrespected you. When someone dismisses you, a sarcastic comment in a meeting, a friend who talks over you, a stranger who looks at you like you're in their way, your amygdala fires before you've processed a single word. Before you've decided what you think about it, before you've even registered the tone, your hypothalamus triggers a full fight or flight cascade in under a second. The same response your body runs when something physically threatens you. Same hardware, same speed. This happens even when the person delivering the comment believes they're being perfectly respectful. Your brain doesn't wait for their intent, it classifies the signal and it moves. So the question isn't whether you feel it. You feel it. Everyone does. The question is, who taught you what it means? Because whoever answered that question for you is still running your reaction every time someone pulls this on you. I used to think rise above it was advice. Turns out it was just suppression wearing a better jacket. More on that in a minute. Here's the thing. A man named Epictetus answered that question around 108 AD. He wasn't a senator. He wasn't a philosopher with tenure and a lecture hall. He was a slave who had his leg broken by his owner. And he still figured out something about disrespect that most people, 2,000 years later, never will. But before we get to what he figured out, you need to understand what's actually happening in your body when that comment lands. Because the mechanism is weirder than you think. The insult itself lasts maybe 5 seconds. Your body's response to it lasts considerably longer than that. In 2004, a pair of researchers named Dickerson and Kemeny ran a meta-analysis across 208 separate studies on stress. They were looking for which types of stressors produced the largest cortisol response, the biggest physiological spike. Pain, failure, physical exertion, social isolation. They tested everything. What produced the most consistent, most significant cortisol elevation wasn't physical threat. It wasn't even failure in isolation. It was being negatively evaluated by another person. Specifically, situations where someone could judge you, dismiss you, or form a low opinion of you. That category, social evaluative threat, outperformed every other stressor category across the entire dataset. 208 studies. The winner was someone looking at you wrong. That's not a metaphor. That's a measured physiological response. When someone dismisses you, your body runs the same stress program it uses when your survival is at stake. The cortisol spikes, blood pressure shifts, your attention narrows. The body doesn't distinguish between a predator and a condescending comment from someone you'll never see again. It just classifies the signal as threat and responds accordingly. And here's the part that makes it worse. The same research found that the lower you perceive your own status, not your actual status, your perceived status, the harder the spike hits. People who already felt uncertain about their standing in a group showed significantly larger cortisol responses to the same dismissive moment than people who felt secure. The biology of disrespect scales with your internal uncertainty. The more you need external respect to feel stable, the more expensive each withdrawal becomes. I spent a long time thinking I was unusually sensitive to this stuff, that certain people just didn't bother me and certain people got under my skin, and the difference was about them. Turns out it was mostly about the floor I was standing on when they said it. This isn't a character flaw. Your nervous system is doing exactly what 200,000 years of evolution designed it to do. The threat is real. The pain is real. The cortisol is real. But what you do with it, that's where most people make the first big mistake. The most common advice for handling disrespect across every self-help article, every LinkedIn post, every well-meaning friend who's watched you get rattled is some version of the same thing. Don't let it show. Keep a straight face. Stay composed. Don't give them the satisfaction of knowing it landed. Rise above. Be the bigger person. That whole category of advice has a name in psychology. It's called suppression. And in the late 1990s, a Stanford psychologist named James Gross ran a series of experiments that should have killed that advice permanently. Here's what he did. He showed people emotionally disturbing footage, graphic surgery, accident scenes. He asked one group to suppress their emotional response. Neutral face, controlled expression, don't let it show. He asked another group to reappraise, to actively change how they were thinking about what they were seeing, to find a different interpretation of the situation. Then he measured everything. Facial expressions, physiological arousal, cortisol, memory. The suppression group looked calm. From the outside, you would have said they handled it well. But their sympathetic nervous system arousal actually increased. Their stress markers stayed elevated. Their memory of the event was impaired. They looked composed. They were burning inside, and the burning wasn't going anywhere. The reappraisal group showed something different: reduced emotional experience, lower physiological response. The feeling itself diminished, not because they pushed it down, but because they changed what the situation meant to them before the emotion fully formed. Think about what that means for you. Every time someone dismisses you and you clench your jaw and decide not to react, you are running the suppression strategy. You look unbothered, your cortisol disagrees. And the thing nobody tells you about suppression is what happens after the interaction ends. The people who never let it show are frequently the same people replaying the exchange at 2 a.m, drafting responses in the shower 3 days later. The feeling didn't leave. You just told it to wait in the car. Suppression doesn't resolve a threat signal. It just delays the processing and adds internal friction. What actually works is reappraisal, changing what the event means before your emotional response locks in, not pretending nothing happened, not performing calm, actually updating the interpretation, which is a completely different move. And here's the thing, that move is about 1900 years older than James Gross. Epictetus wrote exactly one short book we still have. Not a long philosophical treatise, not a multi-volume system. A short handbook, the Enchiridion, that his student Arrian transcribed from his lectures around 108 AD. The whole thing is shorter than most airport paperbacks. Chapter 20 contains a sentence that most people read and immediately misunderstand. It is not the man who reviles or strikes you that insults you, but it is your judgment that these men are insulting you. Most people read that and hear, pretend it doesn't bother you, decide to not care. That's the suppression reading. That's wrong. What Epictetus is actually identifying is something more precise. He's not asking you to feel nothing. He's pointing at where the insult lives, not in the comment, not in the tone, not in the look across the table. The insult lives in the meaning you attach to it, the judgment that this event is evidence of something about your worth. Change that judgment, and you haven't suppressed anything. You've changed the actual input. That's reappraisal, written down 19 centuries before Gross put it in a lab. But here's the detail about Epictetus that most people don't know, and it changes everything about how you hear that sentence. He wasn't writing from comfort. He was a slave. His owner was a man named Epictetus, a freedman of the Emperor Nero. There's a historical account recorded by Simplicius, a philosopher who later wrote commentary on the Enchiridion, that Epictetus, apparently just to see what would happen, began slowly twisting Epictetus's leg. Epictetus told him calmly, "You are going to break it." Epictetus kept going. The leg broke. Epictetus said, "Did I not tell you so?" No outburst, no collapse, no performance of dignity. Just a man who had genuinely decoupled his inner state from what someone else did to his body. I'll be honest, The first time I read that story, I thought it sounded fabricated, like the kind of thing followers invent about teachers to make them seem superhuman. Then I thought about it longer, and I realized it sounds exactly like what someone would sound like after a lifetime of having no legal control over anything except the inside of their own head. That's not myth-making. That's adaptation. When Epictetus says your judgment is the insult, he's not speaking from a seminar room. He's speaking from the position of a person whose body was legally owned by someone else, who still found something that couldn't be touched, which raises a question you probably haven't asked yourself. If he could stay grounded when someone broke his leg, what exactly is a dismissive comment at a dinner table actually threatening? A different set of researchers spent the last 25 years trying to answer that. Here's the thing about disrespect that nobody says out loud. If someone you've never met dismisses you in a parking lot and it ruins your afternoon, you have already told them something about you that you didn't mean to. Not to their face, they don't know. But the fact that it landed that hard, that it followed you home, that you're still turning it over hours later, that's information. About the floor you're standing on, about where your sense of worth is actually anchored. A researcher named Elizabeth Thornton surveyed a large sample of people about self-worth and external approval. 55% reported that their sense of worth was often, more often, or always tied to what other people thought of them. More than half, not insecure people, not people who'd identified a problem and come to fix it, just people. Ordinary, functional adults who had quietly built their identity on a foundation that requires constant external input to stay standing. And here's what that means practically. Every person who has the ability to disrespect you, every dismissive comment, every condescending tone, every moment of being talked over, is a withdrawal from an account you don't control. You can't stop them from taking. You can only hope they don't take too much. That's not strength. That's a hostage situation you volunteered for. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, two psychologists at the University of Rochester, spent decades studying what happens when people's sense of well-being is externally controlled. What they found was consistent. When people rely on external sources to regulate their self-worth, they show diminished resilience, lower creativity, and significantly worse emotional stability under stress. The dependency doesn't make you more attuned to others, it makes you more fragile to them. Seneca saw this coming in 64 AD. In letter 47 to his friend Lucilius, he wrote something that sounds like it was aimed directly at the present moment. Show me a man who is not a slave. One is a slave to lust, another to greed, another to ambition, and all men are slaves to fear. No servitude is more disgraceful than that which is self-imposed. He wasn't talking about literal chains. He was talking about the internal architecture, the part of you that collapses when someone withholds approval, the part that needs the room to validate you before you can feel stable in it. That's the self-imposed servitude. And what Deci and Ryan quantified 2,000 years later is the same thing Seneca diagnosed with a single sentence. The problem was never the person who disrespected you. The problem is that at some point, probably without noticing, you handed them a key they never asked for. You made their opinion of you a variable in your own stability equation. And now, every dismissive comment is a small proof that the equation might not balance. That line from Seneca hit me differently than I expected, because it wasn't pointing at the person who disrespected me. It was pointing at the structure I'd built that made the disrespect matter. That's a harder place to look, but it's the only place the actual fix lives, and it turns out the fix is something quieter than that. James Gross's research didn't just show that reappraisal works, it showed exactly when it has to happen to work at all. The window is small. Between the moment the comment lands and the moment your emotional response crystallizes, there's a gap. A brief pause where the impression has arrived, but the judgment hasn't fully attached yet. Reappraisal works inside that gap. Once the emotion has fully formed, you're managing it. That's harder, slower, and less effective. The intervention has to be upstream, before the meaning locks in, which sounds abstract until you understand what it actually looks like in practice. The first move is just naming it, not out loud, internally. Something landed. My brain just tagged this as a threat. That's it. No analysis, no story, just the label. Research on affect labeling, naming what you're feeling in the moment, consistently shows that the act of labeling reduces amygdala intensity. You're not suppressing anything. You're activating the part of your brain that can actually work with the signal instead of just reacting to it. The second move is what Epictetus called refusing to assent. Don't fill the gap. The cortisol spike that fired when the comment landed will peak and begin declining on its own within minutes, if you don't feed it. Rumination is the fuel, the replay, the drafting of responses, the construction of what you should have said. That's you manually restarting the physiological response every time it starts to settle. Let it peak. Let it drop. Don't help it along. The third move is the reappraisal question. Not as a dismissal, as a genuine inquiry. What does this person's behavior tell me about them right now? Not rhetorically. Actually, someone who dismisses people to feel larger is carrying something you didn't put there. That's not charity toward them. That's just accurate information about where the behavior is coming from. Accurate information changes the interpretation. Changed interpretation changes the physiological response. That's the mechanism. And the fourth move, the one that sounds almost too simple, is writing it down. A study published in the journal Mindfulness in 2026 tested 166 adults with elevated rejection sensitivity. They split them into groups. One group wrote about a rejection experience from a detached reappraisal perspective for 5 minutes. The reappraisal group showed measurable reduction in symptom-linked emotional expression compared to the control group. 5 minutes, written down from a slight distance. The person who designed that 4-step sequence in roughly 108 AD, in a book shorter than most business memos, had none of that research. He had a broken leg and decades of being legally owned, and he landed on the same answer. Notice the impression. Don't assent to it automatically. Ask what it actually means. Write it down if you need to. That's not a productivity framework. That's just what it looks like when someone figures out, through necessity, where the real work happens. The real work was never about the person who disrespected you. It was never about finding the right response or maintaining the right expression or deciding they weren't worth your energy. Those are all still playing the game on their terms. The real work is the floor you're standing on when it happens. Build that floor from something that isn't borrowed, from something no dismissive comment, no condescending tone, no stranger in a parking lot can withdraw. And disrespect stops being a threat. It becomes information, occasionally useful, mostly irrelevant. If you found something worth keeping in this video, the subscribe button is right there. There's more where this came from. So, who taught you what disrespect means? Whoever answered that for you is still running your reaction. The only real question is whether you want to keep letting them.